Hello there, back to another review. Today we're going to be looking at Game of Death, sort of the last sort of film that ever come out. I mean, if you count Tower of Death, Game of Death 2, that kind of thing. But this was sort of the last sort of film by sort of Bruce Lee that we ever really got to see. Sort of like new footage of him, and just like I say, a film that was in production back in 1973. Never Bruce Lee started this film to like sort of he had so many ideas for the Game of Death. He was in production. He was filming sort of fight sequences for the film. Got called up to star in Enter the Dragon. Obviously, took that opportunity from Warner Brothers. And Game of Death, unfortunately, when Bruce Lee passed away in 1973, Game of Death was never finished. It was never completed. So it was released in 1978. And I'm just going to be giving you my sort of retrospective kind of view on it, my thoughts on the film. Is it good? Is it worth seeing? That kind of thing. But I mean, the Game of Death is legendary for being, let's say, the film that Bruce Lee never completed. The film we never got to see. I mean, Way of the Dragon was the last film that Bruce Lee got to see, sort of all the way through in his lifetime that he made. He never got to see like Enter the Dragon when it was completed. So Game of Death was sort of one that he started as I say, and he never ever got to sort of finish his vision, his goal for the film. Lee died, obviously, as I mentioned, during the production, as everyone knows, but this was going to be Bruce Lee's attempt to sort of educate the world to like the different kinds of martial arts, like Taekwondo, how these martial arts would have advantage in a different situations. Lee, obviously, as I say, went off to film Enter the Dragon, but he sadly never got to complete this. But yeah, he was going to try and educate. I think this was going to be a lot more of a deeper film than what we'd seen before from Bruce Lee. I think this was going to be a lot more of his like philosophical side coming in, his sort of his thought process in his approach to fighting, and just the whole Taekwondo method, and just how like not one style is any better than the other, and it's all about adapting to your environment, adapting to the situation, and just not limiting yourself to just one particular style, that kind of thing. This Blu-ray that I've got here, this does contain a lot of the outtakes and the 40 minutes of footage edited as it was Lee's original film. But here I'll be mainly just sort of focusing on sort of the film as it exists, that was released in 1978. Just giving you, as I say, a rundown. I won't get into, because I say there's a plethora of sort of extras on this, and just like I say, it's got revisited 40 minutes of footage edited as Bruce Lee intended. So that's got the whole sort of footage on here, but we're going to be talking about the movie itself here today. I said the idea of the Game of Death is Bruce Lee's fight his way up to the top of this pagoda. This was what Bruce Lee was talking about in sort of the premise for the film. He sort of fights his way at the top of this pagoda, and at the top being sort of some valuable treasure, some untouched treasure that nobody's been before. And each level of the pagoda, there will be a different martial artist, a different villain for Bruce Lee to contend with. I think there was like a story that these gangsters need to get to the top. It had been tried before, but nobody was successful. They end up kidnapping Bruce Lee's character's sister or brother or something, and then they sort of blackmailing him to sort of infiltrate in this pagoda, that kind of thing. I mean, it's a real interesting premise, Game of Death. The version released in 1978 is very different from what Bruce Lee had in mind. The version I've got here is very different. There's like the pagoda element is changed to sort of a restaurant, for example. There's no sort of treasure at the top, but just to give you sort of a brief idea. It was directed by Robert Clouse, who actually directed Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon. The film focuses on Bruce Lee's character, played by Kim Tai-chung, who was most famously, if I mentioned, he was in my Game of Death 2 review. He played sort of the Billy Lowe character, played Billy Lowe in this. He's also in No Retreat, No Surrender, playing Bruce Lee's ghost, with also starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. So Kim Tai-chung is in this as the lead. And he's been basically pressured and threatened by a crime syndicate. He spends much of the film in sunglasses and fakes his own death, and spends a good portion of the film with a fake beard or his sort of moustache and glasses on all the time. And even near the end, he's wearing a motorcycle helmet. So you really don't ever get to see it. Although you're meant to believe it's Bruce Lee. It's very obvious the way they went about it. I mean, faking his own death, so he has to wear a moustache and glasses and things like that. And even before the faking the death element, he was still wearing glasses all the time. Like every scene he's in, where he's inside, outside, at night, he has got sunglasses on. So, which is, okay, but it's just so obvious, and it's, I know they sort of had to work around sort of what the leftover footage from Game of Death would allow them to do. But it's just so obvious. It's just, sometimes it's just, couldn't you have done something a bit more, less obvious? But yeah. So it basically spends a lot of the film just say with a fake beard and a, few like glasses on, that kind of thing. Bob Wall returns in this, obviously having fought Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon, Way of the Dragon, that kind of thing. Sammo Hung is actually involved with this. I think he was the fight coordinator with this film. He actually even makes an appearance fighting Bob Wall's character in one of the many fight sequences in this film. He also choreographed the infamous fight scene with Casanova Wong in the greenhouse that I've mentioned before in any video where it's a Casanova Wong sort of release. So yeah, he choreographed that fight scene. I think he choreographed a lot of the fight sequences in this, apart from the ending, of course, which is choreographed by Bruce Lee many years earlier. But yeah, Sammo Hung makes an appearance, which was great to see. I remember watching it the first time thinking, oh, there's Sammo, Sammo Hung's turned up. But yeah, there's a real big cast in this film, and I think the idea was to just give the film a bit more gravitas, give it a bit more weight. So you've got Colin Camp is in this in one of her many early roles. I mean, you might mostly know her from films like Police Academy, Wayne's World. She was in Clue with Tim Curry. Roy Chow's in this film, who was also the Abbot in Enter the Dragon. He's also had a very prominent role in Bloodsport. He was also in Temple of Doom with Harrison Ford at the start of that. I mean, Roy Chow, one of these actors that really had a great career, both in Western audiences and sort of Asian audiences as well. So yeah, there's a real whole lot of sort of casting. I mean, there's like people like Gig Young, Dean Jagger. I'm not really familiar with these people as such, I will be totally honest with you, but Dean Jagger playing the main villain, he's very much your stereotypical Bond villain. He's got tropical fish, he's got an evil laugh, he's deaf, he falls from a high building, and it's just ticking all the boxes for your typical villain that's fallen from a higher place at the end of the film. That's how he dies, that kind of thing. They do use, which I thought was a bit unsavoury, they do use footage from Bruce Lee's real funeral into this film, which I thought was a bit sort of near the mark. I know they also do it in Tower of Death, Game of Death 2, but when you think, I know in many ways it could be seen as just a little tribute to Bruce Lee, but when in context of the film, it just seems a bit, that's a real guy's funeral that being depicted on screen. I know, like I say, it can be seen as a tribute, but where here it's just fitted in as a sort of a plot device, it just, I don't know, it always left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. It just always left a bit of a sort of, did we really have to go that far kind of moment in this film. But yeah, getting back to sort of the footage that that was recorded. I mean, I believe over 40 minutes of footage was shot, and only about sort of 12 minutes was used in the final version of the film. The Chinese version does have a different soundtrack to this. I mean, the soundtrack on this one I've watched is done by John Barry, who is most famous for doing the Bond films. So the Chinese version has a different soundtrack, and there's slightly different edits here and there, I think, in the Chinese version. Like I said, it does have that greenhouse fight sequence with Casanova Wong. Going back to Bruce Lee's idea of the Pagoda, I think he originally, like I say, every level would be a different martial artist. Obviously, this film is most famous for the yellow tracksuit. I mean, you only need to look at Kill Bill and things like that. That yellow tracksuit is what a lot of people come to associate when they think of Bruce Lee. I mean, that yellow tracksuit is so synced up with the image of Bruce Lee. It is you see that striped yellow tracksuit, you just think of Bruce Lee. And I think the whole idea I read somewhere was why he was wearing that. The whole mentality behind it was to just sort of get across that he's not affiliated with any particular style. Sort of he's neutral. He is not one thing or the other. This is his his interpretation of just his style, his Taekwondo style. So yeah, I think Wang In-sik, I'm not sure the correct way. I've always sort of called him Wang In-sik. That's how I sort of pronounce it. I'm sure some of you might be able to correct me. He was meant to be on the first level. I mean, he was a real life, I think he's still alive actually, a real life Hapkido master. He was meant to be sort of a kicking expert. He's obviously the villain in Young Master. With Jackie Chan, Dragon Lord with Jackie Chan. The second floor was meant to be sort of praying mantis, sort of kung fu type of master. I believe that was meant to be played by Taki Kimura. Again, this is all just me just trying to, how it was meant to be, try and remember what it was meant to be. And Danny Nasanto, the Filipino martial artist who was a very good friend and student of Bruce Lee, was meant to be on the third floor, showcasing Filipino martial arts. Obviously, the film is worth seeing alone just for the end fight the end double nunchaka battle between nunchaka versus nunchaka battle between Danny and Bruce. I mean, it's fantastic, really amazing stuff. It's like Bruce, in previous, like I say, Way of the Dragon, I use double nunchucks. How can I top that? Well, if I haven't gone against somebody who also is wielding nunchucks. So again, mixing it up a bit. The fourth level was meant to play by, I think it was Jihan J. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce his name. I've never been really familiar with this guy, but he was meant to be doing like a Hapkido expert. And on the last floor, obviously, we've got to get round to mention it, was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And with that infamous fight sequence that's been spoofed, referenced, copied, everything so many times, even in films like Rush Hour 3, you know, you only need to look so far, don't look far for. I mean, even just with the fact that Bruce Lee just had sort of 40 minutes of footage from this film sort of complete, the fact that Game of Death has had such an impact, just for them end fight sequences alone, like I say, against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the yellow tracksuit, the fight against Danny Inosanto, you know, these were the sort of things that stuck in people's minds. You know, this is what people think of when they think of Game of Death, and how, like I say, synced up, and how infamous it is with the Bruce Lee image. It really is. I know when they were filming Game of Death, Danny Inosanto come back to film a couple of scenes. I know Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wasn't on board with doing that. Chuck Norris even gets a credit at the start of the film, even though he's only in like stock footage. And Bruce Lee, when they're showing clips of him or his face in this film, it's basically like they do in Tower of Death. It's just showing clips from other films quickly, editing. I mean, the editing must have been a complete nightmare. But, you know, credit to the producers and the directors for completing Game of Death and honouring the Bruce Lee legacy. Although, like I say, the film is nowhere near what Bruce Lee intended it to be. I mean, I know this was going to be something very deep from Bruce Lee, something very philosophical. It was still nice they released the footage. It was still nice you got to see it at the cinema. Obviously, it was a bit before my time being at the cinema, but it was nice that this footage got out, and it's nice that there's such an archive of that footage now, especially like saying this Blu-ray I've got. But so the film has become infamous because of the fight scene with Kareem Abdul and the yellow tracksuit being so iconic. I mean, even though this film was never complete the way, like I mentioned, Lee intended it to be, it paved the way and inspired so many movies. It really did. I mean, the idea of working your way up levels to get to the top, like that's where the end goal is, that's where the kingpin is, that's where the treasure is, that's my target, that kind of thing, working your way up these levels. I mean, you only need to look at films like such as The Raid, by Gareth Evans. That's the whole idea of, right, we're starting on the bottom, we've got to work our way up to the top, that's where we got to go. Even a film like Dredd with Carl Urban, very much the same premise. If you've ever seen that film, in an apartment complex, kingpin's at the top, has to get to the top, that kind of can't get out, there's different levels, and it's very much an arcade type of film. It's very much a sort of a video game type of film where it's just there's different levels and it gets harder and harder as I progress. And I think that's one of the appeals about Game of Death. It was sort of an early sort of Die Hard, if you will. It's got that just one guy just going against his odds again, trying at every level and every scene, and as the film progresses it gets harder and harder and tougher and that kind of thing. But as mentioned, like Jackie Chan, they'd sort of spoof it in Rush Hour 3 a bit. But the way I always remember it most is from City Hunter, when Jackie's character is in the cinema and they've got Game of Death playing in the background, and Jackie's up against two like massively tall guys, and he's not sure how to take him down, so he starts watching Game of Death on the screen and he gets tips from Bruce Lee. That's how I most remember. That's one of the earliest times that I ever saw it spoofed. But that scene in City Hunter always stood out for me. It's like I say, it's a real shame they never got to finish the film, or like just. I think what annoyed, like going back to the whole fake death thing and the moustache and the glasses, I think what annoyed me about the film, not annoyed me, but I just wish they could have just kept it a bit more with what Bruce Lee intended. I understand if he's got to wear sunglasses all the time, Kim Tai-chung, and that's, like I say, I understand they were working with very little. All they had was the ending to go on. But I just wish they'd have just made it a bit more, without the plot being so generic, which is, you know, the film I think was going to be something very deep, very sort of, obviously I think it was going to be Bruce's most personal film to date, and sadly never got to complete it, but they just went the generic way of mafia, thugs, crime syndicate, that kind of thing. But again, not knocking it. I know they had limited things to work with during Game of Death, but It's worth checking out. It's worth checking out. It's a good film. It's a good film, but it's not a great film. It's just worth one of them films like so many bad films can be when it's the first hour 10 minutes are not great, but when you get to the last 20 minutes, I mean, people only went into Game of Death to see the fight sequences with Bruce Lee that have been filmed for Game of Death. So yeah, I enjoy the fight sequences. That's all I really would ever watch this film for now. I mean, like I said, I can watch the fight sequence with Danny and Santo, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar again and again and again, because just if nothing else, they're so iconic. But everybody should see Game of Death, whether you watch the Chinese version or the US version. There's not much in the way of difference, but say the soundtrack's a little bit different here and there. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Game of Death. I hope you enjoyed.